Welcome to the Nativity Podcast, where we give listeners a behind-the-scenes look into the life of our active Catholic parish here in Burke, Virginia. How can we help you grow in your own faith? Listen to find out.
Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to the Nativity Podcast. Ladies and gentlemen, we are so glad you're here. I am your host, as always, Father Ed Bresnahan. I am parochial vicar at the Church of the Nativity in Burke, Virginia. With me, as always,
your director of social media, Mary Castellano.
Oh my gosh, Mary, we are in a great spot today. This is week two. Week two of Lent. We have cruised through the first week, and today we are joined by probably one of our newest staff members.
Yeah,
right? I think
that's accurate.
if not our newest, she's like top 3 newest current staff members. And we are joined by Maria, and then I'm going to say it wrong, but Maria Ammirati.
Sure, that's good enough.
How do you say it?
Ammirati.
Ammirati.
Oh, that's so much cooler.
So I pulled that little, like, I guess somewhat Virginia Southern accent in there. Ammirati. Right.
Ammirati.
I just picture a car. Whenever I hear your last name, you know,
like Maserati.
Like
I had students who called me Miss Maserati, so why not?
Amazing. You drive a Porsche, you drive a Tesla, I drive an Ammirati. Like it feels like there's some branding here that you could really, you could work with.
We can rebrand our religious education.
What would the sisters say?
They would love it. Are you kidding?
Sisters it would feel like a throwback with like Italian cars. Like that's
I think, we need to pitch this to the sisters. So Maria, so we were saying you're brand new to the staff here. So tell us a little bit about your role.
So I'm the coordinator of religious education. I work with the sisters side by side and just do many things in the office. But my main focus is to help the catechists with whatever problems they might have. And I also help coordinate the confirmation year. So 8th graders and some high schoolers.
Amazing.
Nice.
How have you experienced that time since you've been here? You've only been here through really the first semester at this point. So how has your time been?
It's been good. Yeah, it's very familiar. I've done this before. My background's in education, so I know how to deal with those kind of things. So,
amen.
Yeah.
It's nice when you have something that's familiar in terms of what you're doing, but a new adventure, a new challenge, and everything always seems to present its own ordinary things. I love that. Ooh, which, Mary, I think that kind of brings us to a great icebreaker today. I think today I want to ask, this is wild, because the weather is starting to change, right? And just like Maria is getting ready to work with our confirmation kids who are about to kind of reach the pinnacle of their sacramental prep, and the First Communion kids are about to reach the pinnacle of their part and really experience the source and summit of faith. The weather changes, and that usually gets all those stir-crazy people out, right? They get us all out and about. And for some people, they like to stay in and clean their houses and stuff, right? So you get all that spring cleaning and you do all of that. But some people just need to get out into the woods. They need to go on an adventure, like Bilbo and the Hobbit, right? Like
Yes.
I'm going on an adventure. And so I guess my question for you is, like, as the weather changes and you start thinking about going on these adventures, what's like a hike or a camping trip or some journey that was particularly memorable to you?
So there's 2 things. When I was younger, we spent many summers camping. We'd get up in our camper. There was 5 of us. One year there was 9 of us. And we would drive from New York to California. We'd go cross country, come back a different route every time. But another thing I've recently done is a couple of years ago, some friends and I, we went to Switzerland and we hiked through the countryside of Switzerland. So
That's so cool.
80 to 100 miles we did.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
And like Switzerland's an incredible country because there's plenty of farmland. People don't really realize it. There's plenty of farmland, lots of cows.
Mm-hmm.
But none of the farmland is like all centered in one big space. It's all kind of, you got to go over the mountain,
hills,
into a valley, across some hills, and then into a valley. It's very, very
some
uneven.
streams and rivers. Yeah, sometimes it was a very narrow path, and sometimes it was like walking down a road. So
amazing.
That sounds so cool. You sounds like you had a great adventurous upbringing, and that sounds like an amazing trip. So really, I'm not very much of a camper. I didn't grow up camping. The last time I did anything close to camping was actually glamping, for anybody who's familiar with the term.
Glamour camping.
Glamour camping. Yeah, this was, it was in West Virginia. It was called Adventures on the Gorge. I think. It's like maybe 4 or 5 hours away from here. And one of my college girlfriends set this up. And the only reason, she's great. So I said yes because she's great. But the only other reason I said yes to this trip is because our cabin that we were staying at in the woods was a hotel-style cabin. So you walk in and you're basically walking into a hotel room that's in the middle of the woods. Whoa. Fully furnished, 2 queen-size beds, a full bathroom. And we actually had the handicap bathroom, so it was extra nice. Had a mini fridge, a microwave, and a flat screen TV. So,
oh my God.
That's my style of camping.
I couldn't imagine a flat screen TV in a camping environment, but I love it. I love it.
It was so much fun.
That's funny.
And air conditioned and heat.
Oh man, you were ready. Yeah. Did not experience any of that when I was camping. So I'm a Boy Scout actually by trade. When I was a kid, I was in Boy Scouts, and so camping and hiking and backpacking have been kind of really ingrained in my life. And I remember very early on discovering that the part of camping that I'm good at and that I enjoy is the cooking part. Whether it's making breakfast in the morning as everybody gets up, kind of doing the bacon and the, Dutch oven cooking on the fire, having a pot of coffee. Actually it's wild because you could have a fire and a metal pot that's percolating the coffee just on the fire. It kind of just gives it a different vibe, to the idea of, it's not really your Starbucks, or making get a nice latte or anything like that.
Really rustic.
Very rustic. I love that stuff. I'm not so good at the hiking. I like the hiking and I enjoy it and it's all part of the experience. But yeah. The cooking part and that was always the best. But I always remember that the thing that got me through the hiking part, the thing that always helped me kind of persevere was that typically when you hike, say, up a mountain, you might be hiking to a beautiful overlook, or you might be hiking to a place that's really good, is that kind of along the way, sometimes you get to these spots where the trees clear and you can sort of, you can still get you're halfway up the mountain, but you still get a good view of the mountain. Do you know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. And it's always that moment that kind of reminds you of that it's worth persevering, right? Mm-hmm. You're like, oh, this is a beautiful view. Look at the work that I've put in to get to this view. And then saying, I think I can, if this is the view at the halfway point, imagine what the view is going to be at the full point, right? So I always appreciated that, and it always kind of helped me persevere. Plus, also knowing that you're going to be able to come back down and get a good meal, right? That was always a helpful thing.
Definitely.
So I think, I don't know, I think all of our stories, this is amazing because the sense of adventure in Switzerland, and I'm guessing also the sense of community, because if you're with a group of people.
Yeah, there was about 8 of us.
Yeah. 8 people, you probably really got to know those 8 people.
Uh-huh.
You probably have moments where you can share stories about them when you guys catch up or something like that. Hey, remember the time when?
Right.
Yeah.
But most of them I don't see as often. It's more social media kind of keeping in touch with them. But yeah, it's all pictures will come up on memories through your photos, and there'll be that picture of us standing there on the mountain and looking out. And
it's something you'll never forget. Yeah. But with your story, as opposed to the story we're about to share, you were allowed to share that story.
Yeah. Yes, that's right.
Social media.
That's right.
After it happened.
Yeah. Actually, it's a really nice segue, isn't it, Mary? We, today is the second Sunday of Lent. It's wild that we would go straight from kind of commentary on fasting and abstinence and almsgiving and all of those different kinds of things, kind of learning how to live Lent well, to this almost an interlude where we see Christ with 3 of his apostles do something particularly special. And it is up the mountain, and there are tents involved.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, today's gospel comes from Mark, and it comes from the 9th chapter of Mark. So we are halfway through Mark. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Mark. Jesus took Peter, James, and John and led them up a high mountain, apart by themselves, and he was transfigured before them, and his clothes became dazzling white, such as no fuller on earth could bleach them. Then Elijah appeared to them along with Moses, and they were conversing with Jesus. Then Peter said to Jesus in reply, Rabbi, it is good that we are here. Let us make 3 tents, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah. He hardly knew what to say. They were so terrified. Then a cloud came, casting a shadow over them. From the cloud came a voice, "This is my beloved Son. Listen to him." Suddenly, looking around, they no longer saw anyone but Jesus alone with them. As they were coming down from the mountain, he charged them not to relate what they had seen to anyone, except when the Son of Man had risen from the dead. So they kept the matter to themselves, questioning what rising from the dead meant. The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ. Man, the Transfiguration always really strikes me. It's so powerful. But before diving too deep, the last line just caught my eye. Because as I was preparing for this before we started recording, I was thinking to myself, like, just picturing, like, I don't know if anybody who listens, like, watches The Chosen. Like, they do a really good job of giving you, like, a really solid visual of, like, how the disciples, the apostles, like, interacted with Jesus and how, like, just their very human side. So this last line really strikes me as just being really funny. So they, kept the matter to themselves and questioned what rising from the dead meant. Like, I'm picturing the disciples walking away really, really confused and, like, shaking their heads, scratching their heads, and, like, what? I don't know, that just makes me laugh, just having that mental image. But anyway, back to the deeper stuff.
I love it.
But Jesus always reminds them that. Tells them throughout the Gospels all the time, this is what's happening, and yet they never sinks into them.
It's almost like he's 100% forthright, but he's doing his best to explain something to them that, since it's never happened before, it's almost impossible for them, right? I mean, I can imagine the Washington Commanders winning a Super Bowl because they've done it in the past. And it may not have been for 30 years, and there's a lot of people in the world who are alive and do not remember them winning the Super Bowl. They've seen people win the Super Bowl. So if I told you one day the Washington Commanders are going to win the Super Bowl, you can picture it, because you can picture what happens when people win Super Bowls. But I don't know, if I invented a sport that you'd never heard of and told you that, and I made up words that you'd never heard before to explain it. I imagine maybe like what J.K. Rowling was thinking when she invented Quidditch, right? I mean, like, nobody had ever heard of this before. It's a sport that just has vague rules that seem somewhat like other sports. But there's no way to understand it. There's no way to understand what's good or what's bad because you've never seen it before. And so the idea of questioning what rising from the dead means, nobody'd ever seen it before.
Yeah, I think especially in the context of their friend, because they were, good friends with Jesus. So they, like, were probably very confused, but also probably pretty concerned, especially after having this encounter and experience. It's like, okay, now you just had this amazing mountaintop experience. I need you to keep this quiet. It's like,
yeah. How would anybody understand what we were trying to tell them in the first place?
Right. Peter thought it was good that we were here, but and yet now I can't say it to anyone.
Yep.
Don't you want to share that good news once you get it or see it?
Oh, that's so good. And that really leads into that first kind of good, deep topic. What's the deal with the secret? Like, what's up with the fact that we're not allowed to tell anybody? Right? People always give me this idea. They're like, Father, you know what the church needs to do? A better job of marketing. They need to really share it. And then here we have stories in the scripture where Jesus is specifically telling people not to share.
That's so funny you say that. I actually 100% agree. The church could do a better job marketing. But I see your point as well.
Well, what do you guys think of when you guys hear that secret, that kind of big hush-hush? What's the deal?
I was actually kind of hoping you would answer that. When it comes to this in particular, because, I mean, this is definitely not a standalone instance where Christ is asking his disciples, please keep this to yourself, keep this quiet. I recently downloaded the Ascension Press app because it has the Bible and it has, like, Bible in a year. And this is not a sponsored ad, but...
but Ascension, if you do want to sponsor us...
But I've really enjoyed it. And one of the things, so I came across, I'm reading through Matthew. And so I came across one of these situations where I think Jesus healed someone in a private, it was probably the lepers. I can't quite remember exactly which it was, but
he's the blind man. He takes them all by himself.
It was one of the situations where he did it in private. One of the disciples was with him, or maybe even the person who was healed. He basically said, please don't tell anybody this. And of course the next line is that person went and did the exact opposite. They told everybody. So part of me thought, oh, well, maybe he told them that as like reverse psychology because he did want people to know. But then in Jeff Cavins, who wrote the Bible timeline, I believe, he has some notes that are included in this app. And so one of the notes was, why did Jesus ask people to keep this a secret? And he said it was more of a logistical thing, more of a practical thing. It was to help Jesus continue his ministry so that he wouldn't be arrested earlier. And I'm like, oh, okay, like that also makes sense to me. So I'm just curious, Father, with this instance, why is Christ asking these apostles to keep this a secret?
Yeah, one of the things that we learned in the seminary was we learned a bunch of fun words. And Mark is really an interesting gospel writer because he's the shortest of all the gospel writers. And the other ones tend to have more source material and everything like that. And so there's these two concepts that you hear sometimes. One is called the Markan sandwich, which I think is hilarious. And it's just basically that oftentimes Mark will tell two stories with something in between, right? So there's like two pieces of bread. So he feeds 5,000, then he gives a talk, and then he feeds 4,000. And you're supposed to just kind of understand that as these two brackets to an important teaching, right? Or he does this healing, then he does this thing, and then he does another healing that's the same kind of healing. And so it's like a little sandwich. That's one thing Mark does. But the other thing that Mark does is this thing called the Markan secret. And it's that...
I have heard of this.
And the Markan secret is this idea that several times in Mark's gospel, and not necessarily included in other gospels, but in Mark's gospel specifically, Jesus tells people not to share his information, right? Identity theft is a sin. No, Jesus doesn't want his information shared. But I think it's for a couple of reasons, right? And one is that at the end of the day, it's not about the miracle, right? It's not about the miracle. Christ's mission is supported by the miracles, but it's not the miracle. We don't follow Jesus because he fed 5,000 people. We follow him because he's the Son of God, and he teaches us that his body and blood are in the Eucharist. But in order to kind of make that point more salient and make that more of an important point, he does miracles that are related to bread and wine, right? So the miracles support the truth. The miracles aren't like the thing that I follow, right? And regularly he's like telling people, it's like, you followed me because you got bread. You followed me because of this. You followed me because of that, right? The temptation when Jesus does a miracle is that people will follow him only because they want another taste of the miracle.
Gotcha.
Right? And so he asks them to keep it a secret because it's like, look, now is not the time. You know, this is revealing something true about me, but there's more, and I need you to get to the end of it, right? I need you to get to the passion. I need you to get to the cross so that you understand why these miracles matter. That the one who has power over bread, the one who has power over the storm, the one who has power over life and death can be raised from the dead, right? So it all leads up to what he's really trying to do. Fulton Sheen does a really good job of explaining it because he talks about the temptations. When Jesus is tempted in the desert, Fulton Sheen uses the phrase shortcut, that the three things that the devil tempts Jesus about are three shortcuts. They avoid the cross and they get the same result.
Interesting.
Namely, the adoration and the praise of the crowd, the recognition of him as God, and all these other things, right? The three things are shortcuts. And so Jesus isn't taking any shortcuts. So he can't afford to have people carry him off as king when he hasn't finished his mission. So he keeps it a secret. But it does bring us to this interesting point, right? And I'd love to hear what you guys have to say about this, just because this is an incredible moment. What would it, like, where, what the what, right? Like, you were like, what's going on with Jesus being transfigured before Peter, James, and John? How does that resonate with you? What do you imagine is going on in that scene? Like, if you're praying, how do you picture yourself in that scene? What's going on?
Yeah, which disciple am I?
Yeah.
So out of those three, and why did he pick those three rather than any of the other three? And who am I in that scene? But I also think about you talking about shortcuts, but Jesus is kind of giving us a hint rather than a shortcut to show the glory that is going to happen, that he's human and divine, and we see him down on the mountain as the human, but here he is, the divine, trying to give them the glimpse, this hint that this is what's going to happen. This is what our path is going to. This is why we're climbing this mountain. And where am I in that picture too? Like, we know we're on that path. We're on that mountain climb to see that greater glory.
I love that. Maria, where do you see yourself in that?
I'm probably the one a little bit further down the mountain wondering, why am I not up there with those three? But you were talking earlier before we started about who's our favorite apostle. And I always think of myself as John, because I would be the one probably entrusted to take care of the mother kind of thing. You know, that was always my role in the family. Give it to Maria. She'll take care of those other things. So I always identify with John. So
Are you the oldest?
I'm not. I'm the youngest, but I'm the only girl. So that's where that nurturing comes from, and
Definitely.
why I'm the educator and stuff like that. My brothers are also educators, the youngest being the only girl and being the one who had the dolls and stuff like that. So I was the one who took care of things.
No, that resonates with me. I mean, I imagine John is the youngest of the apostles.
Yeah.
And so there is a sense of, okay, like lean on John. John's going to take care of this. John's the faithful disciple. John's the one that perseveres. I would imagine John's probably, of those three, he's probably the least in need of seeing it because he's the most trusting. But I think that there's something really beautiful about being able to be invited so that you can strengthen your brothers, right? So that you can strengthen the people. You know, when he sees Jesus transfigured, and so he's an eyewitness to what Jesus is capable of. I love that, Maria, because you said that it really hones in on his humanity and his divinity.
That's really cool. I like want to ask you, Father, who do you identify with? Or like, where would you see yourself in this? Like, or maybe I'll just go ahead and ask, just assuming. Where do you?
Who are you?
I think I might know the answer.
You probably do. I'm 100% Peter.
Okay.
Yeah. Peter's the one who is so exuberant, right? He is gung ho. Like when he gets something, he is full bore into it. You are the Christ, the Son of the living God, right? Nobody reveals this to him, but his Father, but the Father, like God the Father in heaven, right? Peter is like all in on these things. And so when he sees the transfiguration, he has that moment where he kind of wants to just stay there. Like, guys, this is it. We've seen it. We've seen the top. Let's like stay here. We'll build 3 tents, right? And even though I'm not much of I'm not the great tent builder, but I think the idea of building a tent and wanting to stay close to that reminder of Jesus, I think that's great. I mean, I think it says a lot about his weakness, right? And about where he struggles, because when the cards are on the table and he's basically faced with the little girl in the courtyard, in the courtyard after Jesus's arrest, you know, I mean, in that moment, the little girl asks him, says, "Hey, weren't you with him?" And he doesn't have the heart to say, right? I mean, he's embarrassed. So for all of those moments that he'd seen, like the transfiguration and the glory, he still had trouble kind of putting all the pieces together. So I can absolutely see myself as being very exuberant when I see it, going, I get it. I'm all in. This is amazing. And then also recognizing that I have moments where I'm like, oh yeah, I probably should have done that, or I probably should have fixed this, that, or the other, right? And so just kind of seeing the weaknesses. Where are you in this, Mary?
That's a great question, because I was thinking, I kind of thought Peter as well, but for different reasons.
Yeah.
The idea of, I think I don't know if we've talked about this passage here on the podcast before, but I think in other things, like with Allison or maybe one of our previous priests, like we've talked, like Allison and I have talked about how we can kind of relate to Peter in that, like, he wants to do something. Like there's this amazing presence, this holy presence. Clearly he may not fully understand what's going on, but he recognizes that it's really important. And therefore you should do something and be a good host, kind of in a way of like, you know, if you invite, you know, an important person over to your home, you want to offer them a beverage or make them comfortable. It's this idea of, so I'm definitely stealing this from Allison, but like, but this idea of wanting to be hospitable and take care of your important guests by offering them a tent relates to me. So our ideas of Peter are very different. But then I'm also looking here and I'm wondering, Father, do you know which James is? Because there are 2 Jameses, right?
Yes, and it's going to be James the Greater. Yeah, so James the Greater is the brother of John. So,
Gotcha. Okay.
so when we think of, it's good to think of like maybe 3 groups of apostles, 4 if you count Judas all by himself. But there's kind of like 3 groups of apostles, right? So there's Peter, Andrew, James, and John are the 4 fishermen from Capernaum, right? They're the originals. There's the 2 sets of brothers, and like they're the ones, like Andrew is the first one called, and Andrew brings his brother Peter to Jesus. Jesus has a special role for those 4, right? He stays at Peter and Andrew's mother-in-law, or he stays at Peter's wife's house, right? Peter's wife's mother's house. There we go. Right. There we go. So Jesus is clearly invested in those 4 in kind of a particular way. And it's not just because they were first, but he also places them first because they have kind of a special role in everything. Let's see here. Peter, Andrew, James, John, Matthew, Philip, Thomas, and Bartholomew are 4 kind of other people that Jesus has kind of pulled in from around the system, right? From around like everything. Oh, and Simon the Zealot. So there's they get pulled in from sort of different areas. One's the tax collector, one's the, like they're all there. They're all kind of in the mix in Capernaum, and Thomas is from Cana, and there's a couple of them from in and around the area. They're all Galileans, right? So that's kind of an important thing. They're all from Galilee. So they're all in a way going to be rejected by Judah, right? By the people of Judea and the people in Samaria. So they're just kind of 12 people who are God-fearing, but also outcasts, and not necessarily like the prime pick of the litter, if you will. Right. And then the last 3 are actually related. The last ones are related to Jesus. So James the Less and Jude are brothers, or cousins, but they're also cousins. They're cousins of Jesus. Okay. They're brothers of each other. Okay. If that makes sense. So James the Less is the older brother of Jude. Gotcha. Yeah. That's how they're all related.
Of whose arm we recently.
Yeah. Well, this is what's wild, right? So this was, I did not realize this, but one of the names for Jude is Jude Bar James. Judas Bar James. Now, Bar means son of, or like of, and normally that's your parents' name. Like, a lot of like Danish or Scandinavian people, you might be like, Fredrickson is son of Frederick, and Erickson is son of Eric, right? And so your name reflects who your dad is. But the nickname Judas Bar James is a reference to his brother and not his dad. So it was really an interesting thing to be like, wow, how unimportant are you if like your claim to fame is that you're the brother of the famous guy, and that your last name reflects that. So it was just kind of a wild little twist. But Jude, who was relatively unknown in the course of the scriptures, becomes a very powerful witness of faith. So
yeah, especially, I mean, maybe we could just take a minute to explain to our listeners how incredible it was to host his relic here. We, the priest and the entourage who came with this incredible relic of the arm of St. Jude came to Nativity on Friday, February 9th. And what they did is they had this special counter that came with the relic. It looked almost like a security camera, but what it did was it kept an accurate count of how many people came through the church from 2 p.m. to like 11:30 p.m. that Friday to come and venerate this relic. And it was over 3,700 people, which is wild. I mean, that's more than we get on a Sunday, coming through the whole day, and they came from all over. And it was just really incredible, just to like witness it myself, but then witness the people in their faith. And, so it's just, it's so ironic that this guy is the lesser of his brother. And now, we're going to wait an hour in, thankfully it was beautiful weather, but we're going to wait an hour outside to come in and venerate this man's relic because of his closeness to Jesus, but also, just the power of his intercession for impossible causes and things like that.
Yeah, so the role of the apostles, not to be underestimated, right? Not to be underestimated, but it's also important to know that like in this particular moment, Jesus is only calling 3 of his disciples, right? He's got many disciples. He's got 12 apostles, but of those 12, he only pulls these 3. And it really begs the question, why?
Bishop Barron, who I listen to a lot, talks about the fact that the reason he picked those 3 was that Peter loved him the most, he loved John the most, and then James was the one who sacrificed. He was the first martyr of the 12. So it was those 3 who needed to see that glory before the others, because they were the ones who were going to have to make sure that it went on.
Wow.
That's amazing. There's really nothing that Jesus does is ever out of place.
No. Yeah.
Right? Jesus is very, very good about making sure that all the pieces are in the right place.
And that kind of makes me wonder too, on like the practical side of why he might have asked them to keep this a secret, so that there's no animosity between the other apostles of like, you got to experience this really, really cool thing. Why didn't we get a chance to go up? Because, I could see myself being in that situation of being like, well, why wasn't I invited? Getting that FOMO.
There's a lot of times in the gospel too when he just takes off with a couple of them anyway. So they probably just thought, it's just those 3 happen their turn. Because sometimes he gets in the boat with just 1 or 2 of them. And sometimes he's just by himself, or he says, wait over there while I pray over here. And so they probably never thought about it. I mean, I would have been curious, but that's me.
Yeah. And there are some specific times when Peter, James, and John are it's the 3 of them that are brought in when he raises the little girl from the dead, right? When he heals, Jairus' daughter. He takes those 3 with him to raise Lazarus from the dead. It's those 3 that are there with him for that. So it's kind of very seminal moments, kind of moments that specifically deal with life and death. It's like Jesus is really preparing them in a specific way for what he's about to do. And there's no way, I love this. We talked about this earlier, laughing about this earlier. There's no way they could have understood, right? Yeah. There's no way they could have understood that the fullness of God's plan involved his passion and his death and his resurrection. And ultimately, even though we know the story, this is still why we set Lent up the way that we do, is that the first part is about, our repentance. And that makes sense, right? Most of the prophets, when the prophets are telling us stuff, it's like, hey, repent. Now is the time. The kingdom of God is here. And we're like, oh, kingdom of God is here. Okay, no meat, just fish, right? Fasting on Ash Wednesday and Good Friday, season of Lent, somber, right? And we get ready to go. But then the very next story is like, well, here's a little bit of strength because here's what Lent is really all about. So it's like, we're going to set you guys up at the beginning of Lent so that you have an idea about what the rest of the sacrifice is. Like you need to know as you begin sacrificing whose sacrifice you're connecting to.
Oh yeah, that's really powerful. Yeah, bringing it all back to the why. I think we talk about this probably on our first episode.
Every episode. We always love the why.
Yeah.
It's our favorite letter of the alphabet. The why is always powerful because the why is also what gives us motivation. I know that I like to tell the story. I like to tell that story about hiking up the mountain and seeing the views at the halfway point and at different places. But it always reminds me, it keeps things in context, right? And so being able to see the why of what we do is also, not only does it give us sort of a direction to go, but it gives us the motivation to go through that direction, right? I know one of the hardest things to do for students, and I know this is big, I hope this is big in the work that you do, but trying to figure out how to motivate our religious education kids, right? Sure. And half of it is like, if you ask them the why, sometimes they just want to say like, just because mom made me.
They don't know why they're there.
They don't know why they're there. And so try to help people understand the why in kindergarten, in first grade, in third grade. It gives them enough context to persevere so that they understand where they're going by the time they're in 8th, 9th, 10th.
Every 3-year-old's favorite question is why, isn't it?
Yes.
I mean, it's a constant, why are we going here? Why are we doing this? Why?
Because they're searching for meaning and purpose. Look, if a 3-year-old has trouble getting it, no wonder we have trouble. Well, so what can you guys do? What do you do? Actually, Maria, this is great. What do you do to encourage our young people to understand the why? And maybe what from the Transfiguration gives us maybe some opportunity to figure out the why in Lent?
I think what we need to show the kids is, like you said, why we're here. The Eucharist is the source and summit. That should be our main focus. They should know that the Mass is the most important thing. And then all this work that we're doing with them is to lead them to that. But nowadays and every time, you have to jump through different hoops just to try and get them to understand that. It's really, really hard to try and motivate them. I mean, especially that we here only have them for an hour a week.
I think you're absolutely right. I think that's a huge point too, because we only have them for an hour a week. So try to motivate anybody to be excited about something that's so life changing and life altering. It's incredible. And if you only have an hour to sell that on somebody, and even then, I mean, it gets canceled by Super Bowl Sunday and Martin Luther King's holiday, 2 weeks for snow. And, so it's not even an hour a week. It's an hour a couple of times for the whole year.
I mean, if you think about it, you want to change your life, you want to exercise, go to the gym, you go to the gym every day.
Right.
Here you are, you want to better your life through religion. And the only thing you do is 1 hour a week. And sometimes it's only 1 hour at Mass. It's not even the 1 hour at class.
Oh, so true. And then I think the other side of it is that I think we live in a world where there are a lot of people who are very overstimulated by a lot of things, right? Whether it's technology, whether it's the screens, whether it's just social interaction and the crazy chaos of school, a million sports teams to do and activities. And it's go, 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 go. The idea that an hour a week is going to sort of change that direction and that trajectory, it's a hard sell. But also, I tell people this all the time. It's not just that people are sometimes bored with faith. They're bored with life.
Oh, yeah.
They struggle with everything, right? They struggle in school. They struggle with their families. They struggle with a lot of those kinds of things. So, yeah, I imagine that we could really stand for or use a moment like this, a transfiguration moment, where Christ is transfigured before them and they suddenly, they can't pretend like it doesn't matter, right? When you see Jesus transfigured before you, you are either actively rejecting him or your life is never the same.
Yeah. It's kind of like, Father, what you were saying before of one of the joys of hiking is you get to a point halfway up when you can see there's a parting in the trees and you can start to see the view, and that motivates you to keep going. This whole experience, this experience that the disciples are having, it's not the full fulfillment, but they're getting a taste. It can be challenging, it can be difficult, like your example of you gave an example of the coffee or something. It's not the best, but
yeah.
Or there are struggles of sleeping on the ground, which I will never do. But it's the idea of that motivation, because you see something you want, you see something beautiful, you see something that's kind of a divine and heavenly, like when you look out, from a mountaintop and you see the sunset, the sunrise, or whatever. You're just you're in awe, and that makes it all worth it. That makes the struggle and the strife of, carrying the backpack up the mountain or whatever the case, or maybe you have blisters on your feet or something, of making the struggle worth it. Anyway, so it's, I don't know, the whole hiking analogy really just kind of reminds me of Lent.
I absolutely love it. No, you're not wrong at all. There is definitely a sense of an appetizer, right? And I think that's also exactly what Jesus is intending, right? Jesus is trying to figure out, what do I need to do to strengthen? And this is such a beautiful thing that we just talked about, was the idea that Jesus is strengthening his apostles, right? Jesus is giving his apostles enough to work with, right? And I think it's the difference. I think it really is. I think the transfiguration is the difference between Peter denying Jesus and despairing and never coming back versus Peter denying Jesus, recognizing where he went wrong and knowing that he needs to fix that.
Yeah.
Right? When you know the value of what it is you're looking for, right? It changes what you're willing to do to get there. And I think, for every hiker, for every person who's traveling, through Switzerland or glamping in West Virginia, I think you really do hit you hit points where you're well, what was I doing? What is all this for? Right? And if it wasn't for those little moments, those little foretastes, then you don't necessarily have that encouragement to continue to persevere, right? Why do I want to sleep on a ground with mud and cold and rain, right? Why do I want to endure the difficulties of tough camping if not for the joys of the good stuff, right? You got to fight your way through the clouds to see like the beautiful sunrise, the beautiful sunset. Like it's definitely a thing. And I think a good message maybe to tie this whole episode up is a message of perseverance, right? And to be able to, right, to be encouraged at the beginning of Lent to persevere to the cross.
Yes.
Right? Because it's going to get ugly before it gets better.
Yeah.
Right? And that's not a moment. So many people make fun of Catholics because they despair, right? They kind of look at us and they're like, oh man, here comes Lent, blah, blah, blah. Get the ashes, no meat, no fun, no anything, right? Blah, 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 Lent, right? It's kind of like, how like little kids get upset when they're like, oh, I can't go hang out because my mom won't let me. And like we do that during Lent because we're like, oh, I can't because it's Lent, right? We kind of use that as an excuse. But like, yeah, it's going to get difficult, and people who struggle with their attachments. Boy, if you guys struggle, if our listeners struggle with maintaining your Lenten promise and your Lenten activity, if it just gets so, if it feels like a drudge, right, a drudgery to do that, well, this is the lesson, right? Because first you're seeing just an appetizer, just a taste of what's possible with the Lord, right? You see the Lord in all of his glory, which far surpasses anything you could have possibly given up. And so, yes, we're willing to persevere for it. We're willing to endure the struggles of Lent and detach ourselves from the things that just don't matter, right? That's the other problem with the tents. The tents are like pegged in and they're on that location. Peter, James, and John were never meant to stay on the mountain of the Transfiguration. They needed to come back down. They needed to enter into life. They couldn't just stay there in that spot. Jesus doesn't want you or I to stay where we are. He wants us to go and like do something, to like pick ourselves up a little bit and like persevere. So great lesson for the beginning of Lent. Amazing.
Love that.
Maria, any other kind of things that stuck out to you in our amazing time together?
About the Transfiguration or about
Transfiguration, life in general?
Because we didn't even talk about who he was there with like Abraham and Elijah and all that stuff.
No, you're right. You totally left that part out. Let's jump in real quick.
Part 2.
Yeah. No, let's jump into that. We got it.
Okay, and going from the one mountain to the other mountain. Well, yeah, Abraham is not Abraham. He's there with Moses and Elijah.
Yeah,
Excuse
Moses,
me.
Elijah.
Abraham's the first reading that day.
That's right.
Moses is the law and Elijah is the prophet. So that's what he's showing them.
That's right.
So.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. And again, we were literally just talking about context, weren't we? Yeah. So it's beautiful that in that situation, he gives them something that they would recognize.
That's true. They would have definitely recognized who they were and their importance, especially with, and that Jewish teaching
gets glorified. And so I'm more than that.
Yes.
That's the old way. And now I'm the new way.
Yeah, so you could be stuck in this old way. You could be...
Which Peter always is. He wanted to build those tents.
Yeah.
He wasn't ready to move on.
Yeah, so this is good. So I sincerely hope, that's such a good point. I sincerely hope the Lord is doing something new with you, right? That the Lord in this Lent is doing something new. I think we forget this part. We get so focused on what we're doing for Lent, but what is the Lord doing with you?
Oh, yeah.
And maybe that's just the message we could end with, that the Lord is clearly doing something in our lives.
He's leading us somewhere.
Yeah. I love it. He's led you here, Maria.
Mm-hmm.
Here in our podcast, by very roundabout ways, but he's led us here. And in a beautiful way, he's continuing to lead us. So, dear listeners, I wonder where the Lord is leading you. We'll bring that to prayer this week, and we'll see you next week for that. But before we go, Mary, any shout-outs?
We have to shout out the sisters and all the good work that they do, especially in the next few months. They'll be really gearing up for our sacraments, First Holy Communion, confirmation especially. So yeah, that's a big deal. It's a lot of work. And I don't know if I think we've shouted her out in previous seasons, but Fania is also one of our colleagues who is such a dedicated and hard worker.
Office.
So just want to shout them out, say thank you for all their work with our religious education department. Yeah, they're building the future of the church. It's awesome. It's crazy.
It is amazing to watch you guys work. There's such different personalities, right? Because we've had the sisters on here before. Fania is her own character. Charlie is this like sweet, quiet character, dependable.
Yes. This church would fall apart without Charlie and Carlos.
Charlie and Carlos. So, and then of course now Maria filling in some big shoes because we've had Jennifer on before, right. but really like taking the reins, and I feel it feels it's been good, right?
Yes, it does feel good. Yeah.
So, well, we are grateful for you. We're grateful for the work that you guys do. And remember, friends and dear listeners, the best way to share us is by word of mouth. Like you can certainly like and subscribe. We will never be upset with anybody who likes and subscribes to us and likes our videos and stuff, because that helps us get the word out to, maybe other people who wouldn't have necessarily known. But the number one way is to tell your friends, say, hey, we just heard this great podcast the other day, and we really want to hear, Mary and Father B. So share us, word of mouth.
One of the things that we like to say is if this was helpful for you, the chances that it could very well be very helpful to someone else, especially during this season of Lent. So yeah, if you resonated with anything that we shared in this episode or a previous episode this season, it's really easy to share a podcast via text or email. Just copy the link. And yeah, like Father B was saying, that's the best way. That's the most effective way that I have found as a person who does like digital media professionally. That is the best way to get someone to actually follow or listen or tune into something. So yeah, that's a really easy way to be an apostle, a disciple yourself, and share the gospel. So
amen. And with that, Maria, thank you so much for being on board with us today.
Thank you.
You are amazing. And Mary, as always, we love you. And friends, pray for us and we will pray for you.